The Russians had pulled their artillery fire closer to their own lines, and the heavy projectiles of high explosives crept ever nearer to us, impacting among the most forward units. The incoming rounds shook the earth beneath us, and only with great effort could we hear the shouted commands above the explosions. The 7th Company, to the left of us, had become engaged in heavy fighting. As we advanced, the Russians began to scramble from their positions to flee through the wheat fields toward Kargarlik, some 500 meters distant. Our forward machine gun crews fired their MG-34s while standing in the waist-high wheat, each barrel resting across the shoulder of a crewman in order to maintain a clear field of fire. A number of the Russians were struck by the burst of machine gun fire and tumbled to the earth, disappearing among the wheat stalks. As we moved forward, we came under sporadic rifle fire from a group of Soviets who later surrendered, moving toward us with upraised arms, fear and exhaustion clearly etched in their faces. The day's objective, a railway embankment in front of the village, had been reached. 12 kilometers of territory were won in 6 hours of difficult fighting, and my thoughts dwelt on the insignificance of 12 kilometers. 12 kilometers in an endless land where unbroken fields stretched to the horizon before us from sunrise to sunset. I wondered how many more 12-kilometer battles lay ahead of us during our march away from the setting sun. We came upon one of our casualties lying motionless in the dirt on the road, his helmet still secured tightly to his head, sightless eyes staring into the sky. Russian prisoners were quickly employed to carry the wounded to a field dressing station. Escorted by our lightly wounded, who marched along the edge of the road, the pitiful column wound toward the 2nd Battalion collection point to our rear. Thus the regiment experienced its first clash with the enemy, and we had suffered our first losses as well. With no joy of victory in our ranks, the feeling of excitement quickly drained away to be replaced by an overwhelming sadness and longing to leave this place. As yet we had not experienced the true effects of prolonged warfare, which becomes an environment that sets aside all former bonds to family and culture, and irretrievable replaces them with bonds to the comrade at your side. That was to come in the weeks, months and years ahead. The journalist assigned to the propaganda company would write colorful reports on what had taken place, and would also add that the dead and wounded had done their duty in service to the Führer and the fatherland. Our gun crew was assigned to perform a security detail, and as dusk fell we positioned the gun along the road near the battalion defense line. The isolated bursts of impacting mortar rounds echoed over the wheat fields and seemed to chase the sun as it sank slowly in the west toward Germany. Our thoughts followed the sinking, fiery ball penetrating the evening haze to the horizon, and we thought of our homeland whose borders lay 1,500 kilometers behind us. The front refused to sleep at night. Reconnaissance units from both opposing forces remained on the move, slipping through the darkness to locate the enemy positions. Again and again the Russian Maxim fire broke forth through the darkness, always answered by the ripping sound of our Spandau MG-34s, quickly joined by erratic rifle fire. The occasional detonation of hand grenades and the sharp reports of submachine guns drifted across the fields, and for long moments the defensive lines would be illuminated by glowing flares arcing skyward to hang sizzling above the line. In the early morning hours we were withdrawn from the sector and deployed 2 kilometers to the south in preparation for another attack. The 2nd of August was marked by a break in the monotonous field rations, when we boiled freshly dug potatoes in an unnamed Ukrainian village. Oberschütze Fehr had already plucked a chicken, and together with a boiled hen and potatoes we ate peeled cucumbers. Several hundred meters along the approach to the village on a small rise was Unteroffizier Agner's burned-out half-track. During the previous day's fighting he had driven directly into a well-concealed minefield, where the 3 men of the gun crew met their deaths. 2 of the crew members were killed instantly. The anti-tank mine had severed both of Agner's legs, and he had died that night at the medical collecting point. Their helmets could be seen clustered beneath a birch cross near the destroyed half-track. Their graves added to the mounting casualties the war in the Soviet Union was costing the German army. Not far from their rough gravesite was a row of several dozen wooden box mines dug up by the engineers. The soldiers had long since found an appropriate name for the dead little boxes, referring to them as Kindersärge. Word passed through the ranks of the infantrymen of how the division chaplain, Satzger, had risked his life to recover some of the men who fell wounded before the enemy during the previous day's fighting. We remained ever conscious of how the wounded were treated, as we lived every moment with the reality that we, too, could join them at any time without warning. Many of the soldiers who had not previously been so inclined began to attend religious services, and with the growing consciousness of our own mortality, we became more aware of the presence of the chaplain. As our casualties continued to mount, the chaplain, who wore no insignia of rank in the German army, came to play a more significant role in our lives. For far too many, he would offer the last voice of reassurance and the last vestige of comfort before they, too, succumbed to mortal wounds.